Article: Iroquois Warfare, written by Dean Snow. The Iroquois were known for violence among Europeans from the beginning of their mutual contact. Their name comes from the term killer people in the Pidgin Basque jargon used around the Gulf of St. Lawrence in the late 16th century. Archaeology and oral traditions provide clear evidence that this reputation did not begin with European contact, but was deeply rooted in the Iroquois relations with other American Indian nations in the Northeast. There, as elsewhere in North America, no evidence exists to suggest that American Indians lived in peaceful harmony before European colonization. Keith Otterbein has shown that a rise in warfare typically accompanies the emergence of agriculture as a subsistence strategy, so we should not be surprised that warfare was common among the settled farmers of the eastern woodlands. The League of the Iroquois began the 16th century in a period of endemic warfare that saw them at war with virtually all their neighbors, including each other. 5 nations, the Mohawks, Oneidas, Onondagas, Cayugas, and Senecas, came together in a non-aggression alliance that ended their mutual warfare and redirected it exclusively toward other neighbors, including other Iroquoian nations. The alliance was a weak confederation often referred to in modem literature as the League of the Iroquois, but called Haudenosaunee by modern Iroquois. Recent research indicates that its inception dates to the late 16th century. Other sets of Iroquoian nations came together in similarly weak political confederations. Around the same time, expedient innovations were made necessary by circumstances. The Hurons, Neutrals, and Eries were all multinational confederations. These developments fatally disadvantaged independent Iroquoian nations, such as the Petuns, Susquehannocks, and Wenros, but ultimately so were all the confederations save the Iroquois. Which confederation came first, and thereby deserved the credit for the innovation, is not clear. Still, the League of the Iroquois was the only one to survive the 17th century, and as always the survivors write the history. Iroquois warfare was personal by its nature. Most violence took the form of raids on enemy villages, mainly for the enhancement of the prestige of young males. Raids took place mainly during the warm months while crops were growing. The Iroquois nations were strongly matrilineal and matrilical. Women dominated domestic affairs in the villages, and men controlled the vast forest beyond the surrounding fields. After doing the heavy work of field clearing each spring, the men could leave on diplomatic, trading, and raiding expeditions, which often kept them away until the fall harvest. Young men sought credit for exploits on these long-distance trips, which they needed to advance socially and politically at home. The successful returned with trophies and captives, the latter sometimes intended as replacements for lost relatives. The most desirable young women were unlikely to take on husbands who lacked these credentials. An important cultural premise apparently believed by all Iroquoians at the time explains the high frequency of violence as compared to trade and diplomacy. The premise was that except for drowning, any death was attributable to the conscious act of some evildoer. If the victim died violently, it was easy to argue that someone else was at fault. However, even if the victim died of heart failure while sleeping, the death was usually attributed to someone. The attribution in this case would be an accusation of sorcery, and the accused was usually, but not always, an enemy in a distant community. Whether a child died young or an elderly parent died of cancer at an advanced age, it was nearly always somebody's fault, and revenge was an appropriate response. The sharing of this belief among northern Iroquoians guaranteed that cycles of revenge-motivated violence would percolate unabated in endemic form. The formation of confederations merely disqualified allies as potential evildoers and focused raids on more distant suspects. This pattern of belief and behavior is well documented in the legend of the League of the Iroquois origin.